Pick any wife for free, the Mafia laughed, and everyone thought the scarred old biker was joking when he said, I'll take the fat black teen. But when he walked her out of that warehouse, chains still clinking, the laughter died. He wasn't there to mock her. He was there to save her. What no one knew was that the girl he rescued was tied to the darkest sin of his own past. Now, a broken outlaw and a trafficked teenager must survive each other's ghosts, and a vengeful mafia that wants her back. In a frozen mountain town, faith collides with fury, and two shattered souls fight for forgiveness the world says they don't deserve. But when the truth about her brother's death comes out, will redemption be enough to save them both? Or will the past destroy the only good thing either of them ever found? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The warehouse air hung thick with cigar smoke and the stench of stale beer. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting harsh shadows across the concrete floor where a dozen women and girls huddled together. Their eyes were wide with fear, hands bound with zip ties that bit into their skin. Tony Marone stood at the front of the room, his expensive suit a stark contrast to the grimy surroundings. He gestured dramatically with his lit cigar, addressing the crowd of rough-looking men who filled the space. Gentlemen, welcome to our little marriage bureau." His laughter echoed off the metal walls, joined by the cruel chuckles of his audience. "Now, who's ready to find themselves a lovely bride?" Tony's voice dripped with mock sweetness as he paced in front of the terrified women. "All it takes is the right price, or maybe just making me laugh hard enough." He winked at his associates, who grinned back with yellow teeth. The heavy metal door creaked open, drawing all eyes to a tall figure who stepped inside. The newcomer's leather jacket was weathered and scarred, like the man who wore it. A deep scar ran from his left temple to his jaw, and he walked with a noticeable limp. This was Blade Carson, former Hell's Angel, though none of the men present knew his name. Blade's arrival caused a ripple of whispers through the crowd. His presence commanded attention, even as he moved quietly along the warehouse's edge. His eyes, sharp and alert despite his age, took in every detail: the guards' positions, the exits, the frightened faces of the captives. Tony's smile widened as he spotted Blade. Well, look who's joined our little party." He spread his arms wide in mock welcome. "An old biker, if I'm not mistaken. What brings you to our establishment, friend?" Blade didn't respond immediately. His gaze continued to scan the room, remembering Father Michael's words from earlier that day. "They're selling girls down at the old Phillips warehouse. Someone needs to help. Them." "Come on, old-timer," Tony pressed, clearly enjoying the attention of his audience. "Tell you what, since you've made the effort to join us, I'll make you a special offer." He gestured toward the line of captives. "Pick any wife you want, free of charge. My gift to you." More laughter rippled through the crowd as Blade slowly made his way forward. His boots echoed on the concrete as he studied each face before him. Then he saw her, a young black girl, maybe 17 years old, wearing a torn purple hoodie. She was fuller-figured than the others and stood slightly apart, her chin raised despite her obvious fear. "Her," Blade said, his voice gravelly but firm as he pointed to the girl. "I'll take her." The laughter grew louder, more mocking. Several men elbowed each other, expecting Tony to deliver some cruel punchline. But Blade's expression remained dead serious, his eyes never leaving the girl's face. Tamika Johnson stared back at him, trying to read his intentions. After months of abuse and degradation, she'd learned to be wary of any man's attention. But something about this scarred stranger's steady gaze made her stand a little straighter. Tony raised his eyebrows, cigar pausing halfway to his mouth. The big girl? Really? When Blade didn't react to the taunt, Tony shrugged. Well, who am I to judge a man's tastes? She's all yours, old-timer. He nodded to one of his men, who stepped forward with a box cutter to slice through the zip ties binding Tamika's wrists. She winced as circulation returned to her hands, rubbing the red marks left behind. Come on, Blade said quietly, gesturing toward the door. His voice was gentle, despite his intimidating appearance. Tamika hesitated for just a moment, glancing at the other captives, but she knew this might be her only chance. With small, careful steps, she moved to Blade's side. The crowd parted as they walked toward the exit, their mockery following them like a wave. Enjoy your new wife, Grandpa, someone called out. Hope you got a reinforced bed frame, added another, to general guffaws. Blade ignored them all, keeping his body between Tamika and the crowd. He pushed open the heavy door, and suddenly they were outside in the cold Pennsylvania night. The sudden silence was striking after the warehouse's noise and chaos. Tamika wrapped her arms around herself, shivering in the autumn air. She still hadn't spoken, and her eyes darted between Blade and the dark parking lot, clearly calculating her chances if she needed to run. The stars were bright overhead, and a half moon cast enough light to see by. Tamika took a deep breath, her first taste of truly free air in months. The knot of fear in her chest began to loosen, just slightly, though she knew better than to let her guard down completely. They stood there for a moment in the darkness, this unlikely pair, the scarred old biker and the young girl he'd just saved from a nightmare. Neither of them spoke yet, but something had changed. A first small step had been taken on a path that would transform them both. The sound of raucous laughter still leaked through the warehouse walls behind them, but it seemed more distant now, less powerful. Ahead of them lay uncertainty, but also possibility, and most importantly, freedom. Tamika's breath formed small clouds in the cold air as she looked up at her unlikely rescuer. There were 1,000 questions in her eyes, but she kept them to herself for now. She was free, but she wasn't safe yet. She knew better than to trust too quickly or hope too much. But for the first time in a very long time, she allowed herself to feel something that felt dangerously close to hope. The gravel crunched under their feet as they stood there in the parking lot, while inside the warehouse, Tony's auction continued. But for these two, that world was already beginning to fade away like a bad dream in the morning light. Whatever came next, this moment, this first breath of freedom, would stay with them forever. The old Harley-Davidson trike rumbled through the darkness, its headlight cutting a lonely path through the mountain roads. Tamika huddled deeper under the thick patchwork quilt in the sidecar, her breath visible in the freezing night air. The quilt smelled of lavender and age, a grandmother's scent that made her throat tight with memories she couldn't afford to revisit. Blade hunched over the handlebars, his leather jacket creaking as he navigated the winding roads. Every few minutes, he glanced at the sidecar, as if making sure Tamika was still there. The moon had disappeared behind heavy clouds, and the temperature kept dropping. The wind whistled through gaps in the sidecar's weathered shell. After what felt like hours, they turned onto a rutted dirt road that climbed higher into the mountains. Pine trees loomed on either side, their branches heavy with the promise of snow. The trike's engine echoed off rocky outcrops as they wound their way up toward a dark shape against the pre-dawn sky. The farmhouse emerged from the shadows, a 2-story structure that had seen better days. Paint peeled from its wooden siding, and one of the shutters hung at an angle. But warm light glowed from a window, and smoke curled from the chimney into the dark sky. Blade killed the engine and sudden silence fell around them. He climbed stiffly off the trike, his bad leg causing him to grimace. "Come on," he said quietly. "It's warmer inside." Tameka didn't move at first, clutching the quilt around her shoulders. Her eyes darted between Blade and the house, searching for signs of danger. The warehouse's horrors were still too fresh. The leering faces, the grabbing hands, the cruel laughter. "Nobody here but me," Blade said, reading her hesitation. "Been alone since Ma passed 5 years ago." Slowly, Tameka emerged from the sidecar, her legs stiff from the cold ride. She followed Blade up creaking wooden steps to the front porch, staying well out of arm's reach. He unlocked the door and stepped aside, letting her enter first. The interior was cluttered but clean. Tools and spare parts covered most surfaces, and the furniture had seen better days. But at the center of the main room, a wood stove radiated gentle heat, its glass door showing glowing embers within. The walls held old photographs and what looked like military medals gathering dust. "You're safe here," Blade said firmly, closing the door behind them. "No one touches you. Ever again." His voice carried the weight of a vow. Tameka stood awkwardly in the middle of the room, still wrapped in the quilt. She jumped slightly when Blade moved past her, but he only went to an old chest of drawers. After some rummaging, he pulled out a thick flannel shirt, red and black plaid. "Was Ma's," he explained, holding it out. "Bathroom's down the hall if you want to change. Couch is yours. Got fresh blankets in the chest there." The shirt was soft from years of washing, and it smelled clean. Tameka disappeared into the bathroom, her heart pounding as she locked the door. But no one tried to enter, and when she emerged wearing the oversized flannel, Blade was across the room, adding wood to the stove. "Get some sleep," he said, not turning around. "Morning comes early up here." Tameka curled up on the couch, covering herself with both the quilt and the extra blankets she found in the chest. Despite her fear and uncertainty, exhaustion won out. The last thing she saw was Blade settling into an old armchair, keeping watch. She woke to gray morning light and the smell of something burning. Sitting up quickly, she found herself alone in the living room. Sounds and smells drifted from the kitchen. The sizzle of a pan, muttered curses, the distinct aroma of scorched eggs. Following her nose, she found Blade at the stove, awkwardly trying to flip pancakes with one hand while scraping burnt eggs into the trash with the other. He looked up when she entered, and something like embarrassment crossed his weathered face. "Been a while since I cooked for anyone," he admitted. "Might take some practice." He set a plate in front of her, slightly burnt pancakes and a fresh attempt at eggs. His own plate looked the same. They sat at opposite ends of the small kitchen table, the silence broken only by the scrape of forks and the tick of an old clock on the wall. Tameka picked at her food, taking tiny bites. Her stomach was in knots, years of foster homes and months of captivity making her wary of any kindness. She could feel Blade watching her, but his gaze wasn't threatening. If anything, he seemed concerned. Finally, she gathered her courage and asked the question that had been burning since the warehouse. "Why?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Why did you save me?" Blade set down his fork, and for a long moment he just stared at his plate. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft, carrying echoes of old pain. "Because someone should have saved me once." He didn't elaborate, and Tameka didn't ask. They finished their meal in silence, but it felt less tense than before. As evening approached, Blade cleared his throat. "Got some rules," he said, washing their dinner dishes. "Simple ones. No lies between us. Truth's all I ask. No stealing. You need something, just ask. And don't call me sir. Name's Blade." Tameka nodded, helping dry the dishes without being asked. Outside the kitchen window, snow had started falling, big, soft flakes that drifted down in the gathering darkness. The wood stove crackled, sending warmth through the old house. Standing there in her borrowed flannel shirt, watching the snow fall, Tameka felt something she hadn't experienced in longer than she could remember. It wasn't trust, not yet, but it was something close to safety, a feeling so foreign it almost hurt. She glanced at Blade, who was putting away the last of the dishes. He moved carefully around his kitchen, this scarred man who had saved her without asking anything in return. The snow continued falling outside, turning the world quiet and white, while inside, the first fragile seeds of safety took root. The morning dawned crisp and clear, sunlight glinting off the fresh snow. Blade had been up since before sunrise, clearing the driveway with an old snow shovel. When Tameka emerged from the house, wrapped in his mother's quilt again, he was just finishing up. "Need to get you proper clothes," he said, leaning on the shovel. "Can't have you wearing Ma's old things all winter." The drive into town was quiet, his old Harley trike carefully navigating the slick roads. Tameka huddled in the sidecar, watching the town of Scranton grow larger through breaks in the trees. They pulled up outside Goodwill, the parking lot half empty on a weekday morning. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as they made their way through racks of secondhand clothing. Tameka could feel eyes on them, an aging biker in his worn leather jacket, accompanying a heavy-set black teenager through the women's section. Her cheeks burned as she heard whispers, saw the sideways glances. Blade seemed oblivious to the stares, focusing instead on practical items. "Need warm socks?" he muttered, examining a rack of winter gear. "Boots, too. Gets cold up in the mountains." They gathered an armful of clothes, thick sweaters, jeans, thermal underwear, and a winter coat that actually fit. Tameka tried not to look at the size tags, shame crawling up her throat as she heard two women whispering nearby. But Blade just kept adding items to their cart, checking sizes with quiet efficiency. At the shoe section, they found a pair of sturdy winter boots in her size. As Tameka sat to try them on, a store clerk approached, her pinched expression making her thoughts clear. "You two, together?" the clerk asked, her tone dripping with judgment. Blade straightened to his full height, his voice dropping to that dangerous register that reminded everyone of his past. "She's family," he said flatly. "You got a problem with that?" The clerk backed away quickly, muttering something about just checking, but Blade's words hung in the air between them as they finished shopping. Family. The word felt strange to Tameka, who hadn't had real family since her brother died. They paid for everything and loaded the bags into the trike's storage compartment. The ride home was even quieter than the trip in, snow starting to fall again as they climbed into the mountains. That evening, after putting away her new clothes, Tameka found Blade in the kitchen, making coffee. The question that had been burning since the store finally spilled out. "What did you mean, saying I was family?" Blade didn't look up from the coffee maker, but his shoulders tensed slightly. "Means you're under my roof," he said gruffly. "My word, that makes you mine to protect." Before Tameka could process this, the rumble of another motorcycle approached the house. Blade's expression shifted, not worried exactly, but more alert. A few minutes later, heavy boots thumped on the porch, followed by a sharp knock. "It's open, Rocco," Blade called out. The door swung open to reveal another aging biker, his silver hair pulled back in a ponytail. His leather jacket bore the same faded patches as Blade's, speaking of a shared past. "Damn, Carson," Rocco said, stamping snow from his boots. "Heard rumors you'd gone soft, but didn't believe 'em till now." Blade just grunted, pouring a third cup of coffee. Tamika started to slip away, but Rocco's voice stopped her. This must be the girl everyone's talking about. Tony's real pissed, you know, taking merchandise without paying. She ain't merchandise, Blade snapped, and Tony can go to hell. Rocco raised his hands in surrender. Hey, I ain't arguing. Just saying. Might want to watch your back. Some of the old crew's been asking questions. Tameka had reached the hallway, but something made her pause. Old crew. The words triggered something in her memory. Remember that night in '98? Rocco continued, his voice lower. When we were still riding with the Angels? That hit on the east side that went bad? Don't, Blade warned, but Rocco pressed on. That kid that got caught in the crossfire, what was his name? Johnson. Still gives me nightmares sometimes. The world stopped spinning. Johnson. East Side. 1998. Tameka's knees went weak as the pieces clicked into place. Her brother. They were talking about the night her brother died. She stumbled back into the kitchen, her voice shaking. You were there. Both men turned, faces going pale as they saw her expression. Blade took a step forward, reaching out, but she flinched away. Tameka, he started, but she cut him off. You were with them? Her voice rose, cracking with pain. The ones who killed Marcus? And you thought, what? That saving me would make up for that? Blade's face was haunted, the guilt of 15 years etched in every line. I never knew it was your brother. Not until... Until what? Until you could play hero? The tears were flowing freely now, hot and angry. You think one good deed erases what you did? Before either man could move, she turned and ran, through the front door, into the swirling snow, her new boots crunching through the fresh powder. Behind her, she heard Blade's voice, calling her name into the gathering storm. She ran harder, vision blurred by tears and snow, the cold air burning in her lungs. Blade's shouts grew more desperate as the blizzard intensified, but she couldn't stop. Wouldn't stop. Her whole world had shattered again, and this time there was no safe place to land. Tameka! Blade's voice carried over the wind, heavy with guilt and fear. Please, let me explain. But she kept running, deeper into the white darkness, leaving footprints that the falling snow quickly erased. The blizzard howled through the mountain valleys, turning the world into a blur of white. Blade Carson trudged through knee-deep snow, his bad leg screaming in protest, but he couldn't stop. Not with Tameka out here somewhere in this killing cold. Tameka! His voice was hoarse from hours of shouting. The wind whipped his words away almost before they left his mouth. Please, girl, answer me. The temperature had plummeted as night fell. His fingers, despite thick gloves, had gone numb hours ago. But the thought of giving up never crossed his mind. He'd failed her brother 15 years ago. He wouldn't fail her, too. The beam of his flashlight caught something dark against the white. Footprints, already half filled with fresh snow. His heart leaped. They led toward Miller's Creek, and his blood ran cold at the thought. That water was treacherous even in summer. Tameka. He moved faster now, ignoring the stabbing pain in his knee. The creek came into view, its banks transformed into ghostly ice sculptures by the storm. And there, huddled against a fallen log, was a small, dark shape. No, 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 Blade muttered, stumbling forward. Tameka lay curled into herself, her new coat crusted with ice. Her lips had taken on a bluish tinge that terrified him. He dropped to his knees beside her, checking for a pulse with trembling fingers. It was there, weak and thready, but there. She stirred slightly at his touch, eyes fluttering. Marcus? She whispered. No, baby girl, it's Blade. He shrugged out of his heavy leather jacket, wrapping it around her. I ain't losing another soul to the cold. Not tonight. Not ever. She was too weak to resist as he scooped her up. She felt like ice against him, even through layers of clothing. The walk back seemed endless, each step a battle against wind and exhaustion. But Blade kept moving, whispering encouragement whenever Tamika stirred. Stay with me, girl. Just stay with me. The farmhouse's lights finally appeared through the storm like a beacon. Blade kicked the door open, carrying Tamika straight to the wood stove. He laid her gently on the couch, piling every blanket he owned on top of her. The next hours were a blur of activity. He built up the fire until the room was sweltering, made endless cups of hot tea, and watched anxiously as color slowly returned to Tamika's face. But with warmth came fever, and soon she was tossing restlessly, lost in feverish dreams. "Marcus," she called out repeatedly. "Run, they're coming." Blade sat beside her, wringing out cool cloths for her forehead, his heart breaking at her delirious mumbling. She relived that terrible night over and over. The sound of motorcycles, the flash of gunfire, her brother pushing her behind a dumpster moments before the bullets found him. "I'm sorry," Blade whispered, his voice thick. "God help me, I'm so sorry." Her eyes opened slightly, glazed with fever but somehow focusing on him. "You were there," she accused weakly. Blade's hands clenched into fists, his knuckles white. "Yes," he admitted through gritted teeth. "I was with them, the angels. But that night," he drew a shaky breath. "That night changed everything. Watching that boy die, your brother die, it killed something in me too. The brotherhood I thought I had, it died right there with Marcus." He looked down at his scarred hands. "I left the next day. Never looked back. Been trying to make up for it ever since, though I know nothing ever will." Tamika's eyes had closed again, but her hand found his, gripping it weakly. Whether she truly understood or it was just the fever, Blade couldn't tell. But he held on, watching over her through the long night as the storm raged outside. Dawn was breaking when exhaustion finally claimed him. He dozed off in the chair beside her, his large hand still wrapped protectively around her smaller one. Tamika woke to pale sunlight streaming through frost-covered windows. Her head felt stuffed with cotton, her throat raw, but the fever had broken. She tried to sit up and found she couldn't, not because of weakness, but because something was holding her hand. Blade was slumped awkwardly in the chair beside her, his face lined with exhaustion even in sleep. His hand still held hers, warm and surprisingly gentle for such a scarred warrior. In the morning light, she could see the tracks of tears on his weathered cheeks. Something shifted in her heart as she looked at him. The anger was still there, the grief for her brother still raw, but mixed with it now was understanding. This man had saved her life twice now, once from the traffickers, once from the storm. And maybe, in his own way, he was trying to save himself too. The crunch of tires on snow broke the moment. A police cruiser pulled up outside, its blue and white paint stark against the pristine white landscape. Sheriff Paul Donnelly stepped out, his breath clouding in the frigid air as he approached the house. Blade woke instantly at the sound, years of survival instincts kicking in. He squeezed Tamika's hand once before, releasing it, moving to the window with the silent grace of a much younger man. "Stay here," he told her quietly, then went to meet the sheriff on the porch. Tamika could hear their voices through the thin walls, though they tried to keep their tones low. "You're making powerful enemies, Carson," the sheriff was saying. "Tony Marone's raising hell about you stealing his property. Got his people combing these mountains." "Let them come." Blade's voice was cold as the air outside. They can freeze same as anyone else. I'm not here to arrest you, Donnelly continued. Hell, I'd give you a medal if I could, but watch your back, and the girls. Always do, Paul. Always do. Later that evening, after the sheriff had gone, Blade and Tameka sat before the crackling fire. Steam rose from 2 bowls of chicken soup, not the best Blade had ever made, but hot and comforting. They ate in silence, but it was different now. Not the tense quiet of before, but something peaceful. Understanding, maybe, or the beginning of forgiveness. Outside, snow still blanketed the mountain, pristine and untouched. Inside, 2 wounded souls began the slow process of healing, one shared meal at a time. The mountain winter slowly loosened its grip as days melted into one another. The harsh winds died down to gentle breezes, and patches of grass began peeking through the melting snow. Inside Blade's farmhouse, a different kind of thaw was taking place. "Hand me that 3/8 wrench," Blade said one morning, his voice muffled from beneath his old Harley trike. Tameka surveyed the tools spread out on the oil-stained cloth beside her, hesitating only briefly before selecting the right one. "Good memory," he grunted as she passed it to him. The metallic clink of tools against engine parts filled the garage. "Now watch this. See how the carburetor connects here?" He guided her hands to the part, showing her how everything fit together. Tameka leaned in, absorbing every detail. Her fingers, once hesitant around the tools, now moved with growing confidence. "Like a puzzle," she murmured, "but with purpose." "That's right," Blade nodded approvingly. "Everything's got its place, its reason. You understand how things work. You don't need to depend on nobody else to fix them." Later that afternoon, they moved to his old Ford pickup, parked in the gravel driveway. Blade stood beside the driver's door, watching as Tameka adjusted the seat and mirrors. "Clutch in," he instructed. "Now easy on the gas. Feel how she responds?" Tameka's face was a picture of concentration as she eased the truck forward. The engine stuttered and died. She frowned, but Blade just nodded encouragingly. "Try again. Every stall teaches you something." By sunset, she had managed to drive smooth circles in the field behind the house. Her smile of triumph was brighter than the setting sun. "Skills are freedom," Blade told her as they walked back to the house. "Nobody can take those away from you. You learn to do things yourself. You don't owe nobody nothing." The next few days, Blade disappeared into the old pantry with lumber and tools. The sounds of sawing and hammering filled the house. Tameka caught glimpses of him measuring, cutting, building. When he finally led her to see his work, she stopped in the doorway, stunned. He had transformed the pantry into a proper bedroom. The walls were freshly painted. A small window let in natural light, and there was even a built-in bookshelf. "Pick out whatever curtains you want," he said gruffly, scratching his beard. "Lady at the store said lace is what girls like." The following weekend, they hung delicate lace curtains that Tameka had chosen from the local fabric store. The sunlight filtered through them, casting intricate patterns on the floor. "It's beautiful," she whispered, touching the soft fabric. Blade just nodded, but his eyes crinkled at the corners. Their evenings developed a comfortable routine. After dinner, they would sit at the kitchen table, a well-worn Bible between them. Tameka would help Blade with the harder words, her finger moving patiently under each line as he read. "And forgive us our trespasses," he read slowly, his rough voice stumbling slightly over the words, "as we forgive those who trespass against us." Sometimes he would pause after certain verses, his scarred hands resting heavy on the pages. Tameka never pushed him to continue, understanding that some words cut deeper than others. One afternoon, a sharp knock at the door interrupted their engine repair lesson. Mrs. Henderson from the local church stood on the porch, holding a covered casserole dish. Her eyes darted between Blade and Tameka, barely concealing her disapproval. "We heard you had taken in that—" She paused, lips pursing. "That colored girl. Poor thing must be so confused." Blade's face hardened. Without a word, he took the casserole dish from her hands and promptly shut the door in her face. They could hear her offended gasp through the wood. Later, as they ate the casserole, which was admittedly delicious, Tameka caught Blade still scowling. "You can't fight everyone who looks at us funny," she said softly, a hint of amusement in her voice. Blade stabbed at his food with his fork. "Watch me." The laugh that bubbled up from Tameka's throat was unexpected and genuine. After a moment, Blade's scowl cracked, and he joined in with his own deep chuckle. The sound of their shared laughter filled the kitchen, chasing away the lingering chill of prejudice. They settled into a rhythm as natural as the changing seasons. Mornings were for mechanical work, Blade teaching Tameka everything he knew about engines, tools, and repairs. Afternoons often found them in town, running errands or picking up supplies, Blade's protective presence deterring any suspicious glances or whispered comments. In the kitchen, they took turns cooking. Blade's attempts often ended in near disasters, but Tameka never complained. She started teaching him her grandmother's recipes, guiding his hands as he learned to season properly. "Too much pepper," she would say, taking the shaker from his massive hands. "Never such a thing," he would argue, but his eyes would crinkle with amusement. Their days were filled with small moments of healing. Like when Blade found Tameka singing softly while working on the bike, her voice carrying across the garage. He stood quietly in the doorway, not wanting to interrupt, remembering how she had been silent for so long after he first brought her home. Or when Tameka noticed Blade had hung her brother's name among his daily prayers, written in his careful, unpracticed handwriting. Marcus Johnson. Rest in peace. The transformation wasn't just in their routines or the house itself. It was in the way Tameka's shoulders gradually relaxed, how she began to move through the space as if it were truly her home. It was in the way Blade's perpetual guard lowered, how his rare smiles became more frequent. Even the house seemed to reflect their healing. The cluttered rooms slowly became organized, tools finding proper homes, spaces opening up. Fresh curtains appeared in windows that had been bare for years. The pantry-turned bedroom bloomed with small touches of personality. A colorful quilt, a small vase of wildflowers, books borrowed from the library stacked neatly on the new shelf. Their unlikely family unit grew stronger with each passing day. The laughter that once seemed impossible now came easily, filling the old farmhouse with warmth that no winter could touch. It wasn't perfect. They both carried their scars, visible and invisible, but it was real, and it was healing. The March sun had finally begun to melt the stubborn patches of snow around the farmhouse. Tiny green shoots pushed through the softening earth, reaching for warmth. Inside, Tameka stood before the mirror, smoothing down her new blouse, a deep purple that made her eyes shine. "You ready?" Blade called from the kitchen. "Almost," she answered, taking a deep breath. Today was a big step, enrolling in her GED classes at the Scranton Community Center. The drive into town was quiet, both lost in their own thoughts. Blade's old pickup rumbled along the thawing roads, past fields where farmers were beginning their spring preparations. Tameka watched the scenery blur past her window, fingers fidgeting with the folder of documents in her lap. The community center was a weathered brick building with hopeful banners announcing spring registration and build your future today. Blade's heavy boots echoed in the linoleum hallway as they made their way to the education office. Mrs. Patterson, the counselor, looked up as they entered. Her welcoming smile faltered slightly when she saw Blade's tattoos peeking from beneath his jacket sleeves. Her eyes darted between them, clearly trying to make sense of the odd pair. "I'm here about the GED program," Tamika said, her voice steady and clear. She handed over her paperwork with confident hands. The counselor's demeanor shifted as she reviewed the documents. Tamika's previous academic records showed promise. Honor roll before everything fell apart. As they discussed class schedules and requirements, Mrs. Patterson's professional mask softened into genuine enthusiasm. "Your test scores are impressive," she said, looking at Tamika with new respect. "With some focused study, you could be ready for the exam by summer." Blade sat quietly in the corner, letting Tamika handle the conversation. His presence was steady, supportive without being overwhelming. When paperwork needed signing, he produced a pen from his jacket pocket without being asked. "Will you be able to make the evening classes 3 times a week?" Mrs. Patterson asked. "Yes, ma'am," Blade answered before Tamika could worry. "I'll drive her myself." After finishing the enrollment process, they headed across town to the Veterans Support Center. The familiar scent of coffee and old building greeted them as they entered the meeting room. A dozen men in various stages of life sat in the circle of chairs, some sporting military caps, others in work clothes. "Well, look who finally showed up," called out Jimmy, a former Army sergeant with salt and pepper hair. "And he brought company." The room filled with good-natured ribbing as Blade and Tamika found seats. Several of the men had seen them around town, but hadn't met Tamika properly. "So the old bear's gone soft after all," teased Mike, a younger vet with a prosthetic leg. "Never thought I'd see the day." Blade's expression remained neutral as he settled into his chair. "She needed help," he said simply. Then, after a pause that filled the room with tension, he added, "She's a trafficking survivor." The joking atmosphere evaporated instantly. Several men sat straighter, their expressions hardening with understanding. Others looked away, processing this information. The silence stretched until Frank, a retired Marine with weathered features, broke it. "Your place secure enough?" he asked. "All business now." Blade shrugged. "Doing what I can." "I've got experience reinforcing entry points," Frank offered, his voice gruff but kind. "Could help you upgrade those doors of yours." Other veterans began chiming in with offers of assistance. Security cameras, motion sensors, extra patrols passed the property. What had started as gentle teasing transformed into a tactical planning session. Tamika watched in amazement as these tough men, many bearing visible and invisible scars of their own, rallied around her protection. She caught Blade's eye and saw the ghost of a smile on his face. Later that evening, back at the farmhouse, Tamika decided to try her hand at cornbread. The kitchen filled with the warm scent of baking as she followed her grandmother's recipe from memory. "Smells good," Blade commented from the doorway. "We'll see," she replied, peering anxiously through the oven. "Window." When the timer dinged, she pulled out the cast-iron skillet to find the cornbread burned black on the bottom. The top was a perfect golden brown, but the bottom was unsalvageable. "Oh no," she groaned, setting the hot pan on the stovetop. Blade came closer to inspect the damage. His mouth twitched with suppressed amusement. "Guess you ain't perfect after all," he said, poking at the charred crust with a fork. Tamika felt disappointment surge up, but then caught the teasing light in his eyes. She couldn't help but laugh. "Good thing God don't require that," she replied, already reaching for another mixing bowl. "Round 2? They worked together on the second attempt, Blade showing her how to properly season the skillet and adjust the oven temperature. The kitchen echoed with comfortable conversation and occasional laughter as they traded stories about their worst cooking disasters. The second cornbread came out perfectly golden all over. They ate it warm with butter and honey, sitting at the kitchen table while evening settled around the farmhouse. Outside, spring continued its slow awakening, bringing with it the promise of new beginnings. Through the window, they could see Frank's truck pulling up the driveway, toolbox visible in the bed. True to his word, he'd come to help secure their home. Blade rose to greet him, pausing to ruffle Tameka's hair as he passed. "Save him some cornbread," he said. "The good batch, not the burnt offering." Tameka's laughter followed him out the door, bright and clear in the gathering dusk. She wrapped the warm bread in a clean kitchen towel, grateful for this growing circle of protection, for the way love showed itself in burnt cornbread and reinforced door frames, in GED classes and veterans who understood the importance of feeling safe. The old church bells rang through the crisp morning air as Blade's pickup truck pulled into the gravel parking lot. Tameka smoothed down her Sunday dress, a lovely purple number they'd found at Goodwill last week. She'd spent extra time that morning making sure her hair was just right, wanting to make a good impression. Blade, wearing his cleanest jeans and a pressed button-down shirt, looked almost uncomfortable in his attempt at proper church attire. His leather jacket remained, though. Some habits died hard. "You sure about this?" he asked, killing the engine. Tameka nodded. "Been too long since I've been to service. Besides," she added with a small smile, "about time folks see us in daylight, not just skulking around Goodwill." They walked up the wooden steps of First Baptist, where a few early arrivers were already gathering. Some people smiled politely, others stared, and a few whispered behind their hands. Tameka held her head high, remembering what her mama used to say about dignity being the best answer to ignorance. Inside, the sanctuary smelled of wood polish and old hymnals. Sunlight streamed through stained glass windows, painting rainbow patterns across the worn carpet. They found seats near the back, where Blade could keep an eye on both exits. Old habits died hard there, too. As the congregation filed in, Tameka watched the choir assembling at the front. Their robes swayed as they arranged themselves, and her heart ached with memories of singing in her childhood church choir. Without really planning to, she found herself standing up. "Where you going?" Blade whispered. "To sing," she replied simply, already moving toward the front. The choir director, Mrs. Eleanor Matthews, also the pastor's wife, was organizing sheet music when Tameka approached. Her perfectly coiffed gray hair and pressed choir robe exuded authority. "Excuse me," Tameka said politely. "I'd like to join the choir today, if that's all right." Mrs. Matthews looked up, her expression shifting from surprise to barely concealed discomfort. "Oh, well," she began, glancing around at the other choir members. "We actually have enough singers for today. Maybe another time?" Tameka felt the familiar sting of rejection, but something else rose up stronger: determination. She smiled politely but didn't move. "That's okay. I'll just sing from back here." She took up position slightly behind the formal choir arrangement. A few members turned to stare, but Tameka kept her eyes forward, focused on the cross hanging above the altar. The service began with "Amazing Grace," and Tameka let the first verse pass, just listening. Then, on the second verse, she began to sing. Her voice started soft but grew stronger with each word, rich and full of emotion. Years of singing in church and school choirs had trained her well, but it was the pain and hope of recent months that gave her voice its power. The congregation began to quiet, heads turning. Even some choir members stopped to listen. Tameka's voice filled the sanctuary, lifting to the rafters with pure, clear notes that seemed to carry all the joy and sorrow of her young life. Through many dangers, toils and snares, I have already come. 'Tis grace that brought me safe thus far, and grace will lead me home. As the final notes faded, silence held the room for a long moment. Then the piano struck up the next hymn, and the service continued. But something had shifted. People who had been whispering earlier now sat straighter, some nodding with respect. A few choir members smiled encouragingly over their shoulders. After the service, several people approached to compliment Tameka's voice. Mrs. Matthews hung back, looking somewhat chastened. Even Pastor Matthews came over to shake both their hands. "You have a gift, young lady," he said warmly. "We'd be blessed to have you join our choir regularly." Outside in the sunshine, Blade and Tameka walked back to the truck. His weathered face wore an expression of unmistakable pride. "You changed the air in there," he said, unlocking the doors. Tameka smiled, thinking about how the morning had unfolded. "No," she replied thoughtfully. "I just reminded them how to breathe." The drive home was quiet, both of them processing the morning's events. As they pulled into the driveway, Blade suddenly said, "Got an idea." That afternoon, they sat at the kitchen table working on a plan. Blade had been fixing motorcycles for years, helping out fellow veterans when he could. Tameka had shown real talent for mechanical work, picking up skills quickly. "We could make it official," Blade suggested, sketching out numbers on a notepad. "Set up proper shop hours, take donations instead of regular payments, use the money to help other survivors get back on their feet." Tameka leaned forward, excited by the possibility. "We could help people like me," she said softly. "Give them somewhere to go, something to learn." They worked together designing simple flyers. Repairs for donations, proceeds help survivors. Tameka added her artistic touch, drawing a simple motorcycle alongside a rising sun. The next day, they began posting the flyers around town, at the Veterans Support Center, community bulletin boards, local diners. Word spread quickly through the veteran community, and within days, their first customers started arriving. Blade's workshop, once a solitary space, came alive with activity. He taught Tameka everything he knew about engines, watching with satisfaction as she mastered each new skill. Together they worked on bikes of all kinds, from beaten-up Harleys to small commuter motorcycles. Some customers paid what they could in cash, others brought food or offered services in exchange. Every donation went into a special account Blade set up at the local credit union, earmarked for helping trafficking survivors. The shop became more than just a repair station. Veterans would often stay to talk, sharing coffee and stories. Some brought their families. Children would watch fascinated as Tameka explained basic engine parts, her natural teaching ability shining through. Word spread beyond the veteran community. Other survivors started showing up, first just to talk, then to learn. Tameka became their bridge, showing them that healing was possible, that skills meant freedom. Local businesses began to take notice. The hardware store offered them discounted parts. The diner down the road sent over free lunches. Even the church ladies who had once whispered about them now brought casseroles and cookies. One evening, as they cleaned up after a busy day, Tameka looked around the transformed workshop. Tools lined the walls in neat rows, a coffee pot burbled in the corner, and a cork board displayed photos of satisfied customers with their restored bikes. "Never thought we'd be running a proper business," she said, wiping grease from her hands. Blade grunted in agreement, but his eyes were warm as he surveyed their work. The shop had become something neither of them expected, a beacon of hope in the town's gray heart, a place where broken things and broken people could find new purpose. They worked side By side in comfortable silence, the radio playing softly in the background. Through the open workshop door, the sunset painted the sky in shades of hope, promising another day of purpose tomorrow. December arrived with bitter winds and early darkness. Christmas lights twinkled across town, but they brought no warmth to the growing shadows around Blade's farmhouse. The holiday season, usually a time of joy, carried an undercurrent of menace. It started with a black sedan following Blade's pickup truck at a distance. He noticed it in his rearview mirror, always 3 cars back, never getting closer but never quite disappearing either. His jaw tightened every time he spotted it, but he said nothing to Tamika. The mailbox became a source of dread. Mixed in with Christmas cards and repair shop invoices, threatening notes appeared. Blade tried to collect them before Tamika could see, burning them in the wood stove when she wasn't looking. But he couldn't catch them all. One raw morning, while Blade was changing the oil in a veteran's motorcycle, Tamika went to check the mail. Among the envelopes, she found a piece of paper folded into quarters. Her hands trembled as she read the message scrawled in thick black marker. "You owe us what's ours." She stood there in the cold, the paper shaking in her grip, until Blade's heavy footsteps crunched through the snow behind her. He gently took the note from her hands, his weathered face hardening as he read it. "Don't worry about this," he said gruffly, trying to stuff the paper in his pocket. "Tony's men won't stop, will they?" Tamika's voice was quiet but steady. Blade's silence was answer enough. That evening, after their simple dinner of soup and cornbread, Tamika knelt by the couch where she'd first slept months ago. Her prayer filled the dim room, steady and clear. "Lord, please protect us from those who wish us harm," she began. "And Lord, I forgive Tony Marone and his men for what they've done." The sound of Blade cleaning his revolver at the kitchen table stopped abruptly. "You forgive monsters?" he asked, his voice rough with disbelief. Tamika opened her eyes, looking at him steadily. "That's how they stop being monsters," she replied, her voice gentle but firm. Blade's hands tightened on the gun cloth, but he said nothing more. The clock ticked loudly in the silence between them. Days passed with increasing tension. Blade installed extra locks on the doors and windows. He taught Tamika how to use the shotgun, though his hands shook as he showed her. The garage became their fortress. They worked on bikes with one eye always on the door. Then came the morning Blade had to visit the Veterans Affairs Hospital. His old war injury was acting up, and the doctor had insisted on seeing him. He didn't want to leave Tamika alone, but she assured him she'd be fine. "I've got my phone, the shotgun, and God," she said with a small smile. "Go get your leg checked out." Blade hesitated in the doorway, looking back at her. She was bent over a motorcycle engine, confidence in every movement. He couldn't shake the feeling of dread, but he got in his truck and drove away. The hospital visit took longer than expected. When Blade finally turned onto his road 3 hours later, he knew something was wrong. The garage door gaped open, tools scattered across the snowy ground. Inside, the workshop was devastated. Toolboxes overturned, parts strewn everywhere. "Tamika!" His voice echoed through the empty building. "Tamika!" He limped through the wreckage, calling her name. In the kitchen, he found her Bible on the counter, open to Romans. A page was carefully marked, the verse highlighted. "Be not overcome of evil, but overcome evil with good." Blade's hands shook as he touched the worn pages. Rage burned through his veins like molten steel, but alongside it ran something else, a steady resolve that felt almost like grace. He reached for his phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in months. It rang twice before a gruff voice answered. "Rocco." Blade's voice was deadly calm. "One last ride." The silence on the other end lasted only a moment. "Where do you need me, brother?" As Blade explained what had happened, his eyes never left the Bible on the counter. The Christmas lights outside cast colored shadows across its pages, but the highlighted verse stood out clear and strong. "Be not overcome of evil, but overcome evil with good." The rage still burned, but now it had purpose. Tony Marone had taken Tameka thinking she was property, a possession to be stolen back. He didn't understand that she was family, and family fought differently. Family fought with both strength and grace. Blade touched the Bible one last time before heading to the garage. He had preparations to make. This wouldn't be like the old days. This was about rescue, not revenge. About redemption, not retaliation. Outside, snow began to fall, covering the scattered tools and tire tracks in a blanket of white. Christmas was coming. But first, Blade had a promise to keep. A promise made months ago in a dim warehouse. No one would ever hurt Tameka again. He checked his gun one last time, tucked it away, and waited for Rocco. The night grew darker, but somewhere in that darkness, Tameka's words echoed. That's how they stop being monsters. He didn't know if he believed it yet, but he was willing to try, for her sake. The Christmas Eve moon cast long shadows across the warehouse district. Blade's pickup truck rolled silently through the empty streets, followed by 3 unmarked vans. His hands gripped the steering wheel tight enough to whiten his knuckles. Behind him, camera equipment rattled in the vehicle. Channel 6 News' finest gear, borrowed through one of Rocco's connections. Snow crunched under their tires as they parked behind the warehouse. The same warehouse where he'd first found Tameka, now transformed into a trap of their own making. Mike Chen, the news reporter, adjusted his tie while his cameraman checked the equipment. "You sure about this, Mr. Carson?" Mike whispered. Blade nodded grimly. "Tony wants a show? Let's give him one he'll never forget." The veteran rescue team, former Marines and Army Rangers, spread out around the building's perimeter. Their radios crackled with quiet coordination. FBI agents waited in position several blocks away, ready to move on signal. Blade pushed open the warehouse doors with a bang that echoed through the cavernous space. The smell of cigars and fear hit him like a wall. Tony Marone stood at his usual spot, surrounded by his men, their laughter dying as they recognized the intruder. "Carson?" Tony's face twisted into an ugly smile. "You got some nerve." "Lights!" Blade shouted. Bright camera lights flooded the warehouse. Mike Chen stepped forward, microphone in hand, his cameraman recording everything. "Good evening, viewers. We're live outside Scranton, where we've received reports of human trafficking." Tony's men reached for their guns, but froze when they realized what was happening. Live television. Witnesses. Evidence. "You want a show, Tony?" Blade's voice boomed through the space. "Here's your audience." Without waiting for a response, he limped toward the back room. His bad leg screamed with every step, but adrenaline pushed him forward. The heavy door yielded to his shoulder, revealing what he'd feared most. Dozens of girls chained to the walls, huddled in terror. Tameka sat among them, her face bruised but her eyes blazing with defiance. When Tony's men raised their weapons, she shouted, "Don't shoot! You're on live TV!" The cameras swung toward the scene, capturing everything. Tony's face drained of color as he realized his empire was crumbling on live television. "Drop your weapons," Blade commanded, raising his empty hands. "The whole world's watching now." Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. Tony's men looked to their boss, panic replacing their usual arrogance. One by one, guns clattered to the floor. The FBI burst through every entrance, filling the warehouse with shouts of "Federal agents" and "Hands where we can see them." Tony tried to run, but didn't make it 3 steps before being tackled. Blade moved through the chaos toward Tameka, his heart pounding with relief. That's when he saw it. One of Tony's men, hidden behind a stack of crates, raising a pistol toward a young girl no more than 13. Without thinking, Blade threw himself forward. The gunshot cracked through the air like thunder. Pain exploded in his chest as he collapsed, his body shielding the terrified girl. "No!" Tameka's scream cut through the chaos. She caught him as he fell, cradling his head in her lap. "Don't you die on me, old man," she sobbed, pressing her hands against the wound. Blade looked up at her through dimming vision. Despite the pain, a small smile crossed his weathered face. "Guess I finally did something right," he whispered before. Everything faded to black. The warehouse erupted into frenzied activity. FBI agents secured the scene while paramedics rushed forward. News cameras captured it all, the rescued girls being freed from their chains, Tony Marone and his men in handcuffs, and Tameka holding Blade's hand as the medics worked to save him. Outside, red and blue lights painted the falling snow in alternating colors. Christmas Eve had brought an unexpected gift to Scranton: freedom for the captive, justice for the wicked, and for one old biker, a chance to prove that redemption was possible, even at the highest cost. White light filtered through Blade's eyelids as consciousness slowly returned. The steady beep of medical equipment filled his ears, and the sterile smell of disinfectant replaced the familiar scents of motor oil and wood smoke he'd grown used to. His throat felt dry, like sandpaper. Opening his eyes took tremendous effort. The hospital room gradually came into focus. Pale blue walls, monitors displaying his vital signs, and large windows where snowflakes drifted past like lazy dancers. 2 weeks had passed, though to him it felt like mere moments since the warehouse. Tubes snaked from both his arms, carrying fluids and medication. He tried to shift his position, but realized with a jolt of panic that he couldn't feel his legs. The fear must have shown on his face, because a familiar voice immediately soothed him. "Hey, old man. Welcome back." Tameka sat in the chair beside his bed, dark circles under her eyes betraying her exhaustion. But there was something else there too, a radiance, a quiet strength that seemed to fill the whole room. She looked different somehow, more assured, more at peace. "Water," he croaked. She held a cup to his lips, helping him take small sips. When he could speak again, he asked, "Tony?" A smile spread across her face. "Gone. For good this time. That video we made? It went viral. Millions of people have seen it. The FBI found evidence linking him to trafficking rings in 3 states. They're saying he'll never see daylight again." Blade closed his eyes, letting relief wash over him. When he opened them again, Tameka was still there, watching him with gentle concern. "The townspeople," she continued, "they've been amazing. Once the story broke, everyone wanted to help. They organized fundraisers for your medical care. Even that church lady who was so nasty before, she brought casseroles to the house and apologized." His voice was rough with emotion. "The house, the garage, both fine," she assured him. "I've been staying there, keeping everything running. You should see it. We've got volunteers helping with the motorcycle repairs. Veterans come by every day to check on things. That old Marine who helped us? He's teaching me advanced engine work." A tear rolled down Blade's weathered cheek. "You didn't have to." "Yes, I did," she interrupted firmly. "You gave me a home. Now it's my turn to take care of it." He studied her face, seeing the changes these months had brought. The scared girl from the warehouse was gone, replaced by a young woman who radiated confidence and purpose. "You're stronger than I ever was," he whispered. Tameka's smile widened. "You made me believe I could be." She squeezed his hand gently. "Remember what you told me that first night? You're safe here. No one touches you. Well, same goes for you now. You're not alone anymore. More tears came then, and Blade didn't try to stop them. Years of guilt, pain, and loneliness broke free like ice in spring thaw. Tameka held his hand tighter, and then, softly at first, she began to hum. The melody was achingly familiar. Amazing Grace, the same hymn his mother used to sing when he was small. The notes filled the quiet hospital room, carrying memories of Sunday mornings and his mother's gentle voice. Tameka's rich alto brought new life to the old words. Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. Outside, snow continued to fall, coating the world in pristine white. Inside, father and daughter in all but blood shared a moment of perfect peace, their hearts bound by something stronger than fear, stronger than pain, the grace of second chances and the miracle of found family. Spring sunshine warmed the familiar driveway as Rocco's truck pulled up to the farmhouse. Blade sat quietly in the passenger seat, his wheelchair folded in the back. The house looked different, freshly painted with window boxes full of bright flowers and a new ramp leading to the front door. "Home sweet home," Tameka called out, emerging from the garage in coveralls streaked with grease. Her smile lit up the whole yard. Getting Blade settled into his wheelchair took time, but there was no rush. The mountain air carried the scent of pine and fresh-cut grass, so different from the hospital's sterile atmosphere. Inside, the house had transformed. Clean windows let in streams of sunlight, and photos covered the walls. Shots of smiling girls working on motorcycles, certificates of achievement, and newspaper clippings about their rescue work. "Welcome to Hearts on Wheels headquarters," Tameka announced proudly, wheeling him through the living room. The old clutter was gone, replaced by organized tool stations and teaching materials. "We've got 8 girls in the program now. They learn mechanics, business skills, and self-defense." Blade's throat tightened as he took it all in. "You did all this?" "We did," she corrected. "Your reputation helped open doors. Plus those veterans you helped, they're our biggest supporters." Sundays became special days. The same church that once shunned Tameka now welcomed her as a speaker. On this particular morning, the pews were packed as she stood at the pulpit, her voice strong and clear. "People ask me about the night Blade Carson saved me," she began, her eyes finding him in the back pew. "But that's not quite right. He didn't save me. God just used him to remind me I was never lost. Sometimes angels wear leather jackets and ride Harleys." Gentle laughter rippled through the congregation. Blade ducked his head, but couldn't hide the tears in his eyes. "We think being saved means being perfect," she continued, "but it really means being found, being reminded that God never stopped seeing us, even when we couldn't see ourselves." After the service, a line formed to thank Blade. Person after person shook his hand, sharing stories of how Hearts on Wheels had touched their lives. He kept shaking his head, uncomfortable with the praise. "Wasn't me," he murmured repeatedly. "Was her faith. Always was." Tameka stood beside his wheelchair, one hand resting on his shoulder, united in their shared mission of healing and hope. The spring morning dawned clear and bright, painting the church grounds in soft golden light. Blade sat in his wheelchair, holding a pristine white rose bush in his lap, while Tameka directed a group of eager children where to dig. "A little deeper," she instructed, demonstrating with her own shovel. The kids, all part of Hearts on Wheels community outreach program, dug enthusiastically, their faces bright with purpose. Townsfolk gathered around, phones raised to capture the moment. The white rose bush symbolized something bigger than itself, a testament to transformation and second chances. Blade watched as Tamika carefully positioned the bush beside the church steps, her hands gentle as she packed soil around its roots. "This rose," she announced, her voice carrying across the crowd, "is dedicated to all souls somebody once called unlovable." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Several people wiped tears from their eyes, understanding the depth behind the simple statement. Blade leaned close to Tamika, his voice rough with emotion. "Guess the joke's on the Mafia," he whispered, thinking about how far they'd come from that dark warehouse night. Tamika's laugh bubbled through her tears, bright and genuine. "God writes better punchlines," she replied, squeezing his shoulder. Together they unveiled a small plaque beside the rose bush. The metal caught the morning light, making the words shine. "For every life once sold, now redeemed." The crowd applauded, cameras flashing to capture the moment. Later that afternoon, Tamika walked over to where Blade's old Harley waited, newly rebuilt and gleaming. She'd spent months restoring it, making it her own while honoring its history. Swinging her leg over the seat, she kicked the engine to life. Blade watched from his wheelchair, pride evident in his smile as Tamika revved the engine. Her hair caught the wind as she pulled away, the sound of the motor echoing off the church walls. She rode with confidence, each mile taking her further from who she used to be and closer to who she was meant to become. The sight of her on that Harley, free, strong, unbound, painted a picture of redemption more powerful than words could express. As she disappeared down the road, the white rose petals danced in the bike's wake, a reminder that beauty could bloom from even the darkest soil. Thank you for listening. Stories connect us in the most unexpected ways. If you felt that spark today, make sure you're subscribed. I share a new one daily, and the next might change your day.